Hello, everyone. I'm Jill Danello from Green Education US, and I'm zooming in from the Ashamen territory. For the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about the type of investment in infrastructure that's needed. We're going to discuss mission-based recycling and how community-based MRFs are bringing us to zero waste. Leading us off this afternoon is Gary Liss. Gary has 47 years of experience in recycling. He's a leading advocate of zero waste and is the coordinator of the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. He is the vice president of Zero Waste USA, past president and lifetime honorary board member of the National Recycling Coalition. He also served on the town council and was mayor of Loomis, California. And I could probably go on and on for about 10 more minutes, but then we'd have no time.
But pause for just a minute, Jill. I think Chris needs to put up the other slide. But you can keep going. Okay, there you go. Keep going.
Gary's going to start us off by providing an update on the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. Next, we'll hear from Bob Geddert. Bob Geddert is the president of the National Recycling Coalition. My notes say that he's semi-retired, but I don't believe it from what I see. Maybe he's just not getting paid for all his work now. But after a 40-year career in guiding communities towards sustainable materials management through a systems approach, bridging recycling best practices and sustainability with local economic development practices. He's currently writing a book on actions one can take to slow the effects of climate change and teaches a class on climate change at Xavier University in Cincinnati. Bob's going to share with us about the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan. From there, we'll transition to Lynn Hoffman. Lynn is the co-president of Eureka Recycling and the national coordinator for AMBER, the Alliance for Mission-Based Recyclers. Eureka Recycling is a 501c3 social enterprise in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and boasts hosting 120 living wage jobs. And Lynn is going to talk to us about how and why you recycle matters. Following Lynn, we're going to hear from Brian Ukena, the CEO of Recycle Ann Arbor, based in Michigan. Brian's been a recycling activist and anti-waste warrior since childhood. And I just read that he camped in an Airstream before it was hip. So we'll have to hear more about that at some point. But today, Brian's going to talk to us about the mission-based approach and communities in recycling. So with that, we're going to use the chat. We're going to continue to chat for questions. If you can proceed your question with a Q, maybe put the name of the person that the question is directed to. That will help us coordinate the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Jill. Someone needs to allow me to screen share.
You can screen share now.
Okay, I'm here to talk about the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. I'm using he, him pronouns, and I'm speaking on ancestral lands of the Maidu Indians. The Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign was started this year. Initiated by the Zero Waste USA and Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who invited in the National Recycling Coalition, and Green Education has been providing technical support for moving this forward. We set up a Google group, Recycling Infrastructure, at googlegroups.com. If someone could put that in the chat, that would be helpful. Early on in May, we had a couple of organizing meetings and then asked people to sign on to our initial news release about this. This is a group of 10 organizations that agreed to be part of listing on that news release. And the news release is posted and available for people to read more details. We worked with the National Recycling Coalition, Bob Geddert particularly, to develop the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan, which he'll be talking about next, and have been doing monthly webinars since May. In July, we highlighted the infrastructure plan. In August, the national bottle bill provision of that plan. In September, we had lobbyists in DC talking about what's in the infrastructure bills for recycling before the bipartisan bill was passed. And we have 4 more coming up on industrial infrastructure investments, wasting surcharges on landfills and incinerators, how to apply for infrastructure grants. We hope to be able to do something significant by March on that, and highlighting resource recovery parks. We've gotten some good media coverage for the campaign. Probably most important is that we've coordinated with a whole variety of groups that have been working to advocate for this for over the past 5 years, and helping connect them with our networks so that our networks can help tell the stories to your local congressperson, your U.S. senator, to move forward to help them vote for the types of bills that are needed. The campaign is advocating for the use of reuse systems, recycled content, and compost products as part of the eligible activities for all infrastructure projects. And we highlight in all my presentations, if you're not for zero waste, how much waste are you for? Bob's going to be coming on next, highlighting the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan. Bob Geddert, National Recycling Coalition.
And greetings, everybody. This is Bob Geddert, and I'm from the Cincinnati area. I live on the Miami and Shawnee area lands. And I'm here to talk about the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan that Gary introduced to you. I note to you that as Gary noted, that it was released in mid-July. It was sent to the congressional staff and media, and has 50 initiatives, unique initiatives, about half of them, and $8.6 billion in the first year in value. Over 3 years, $18.3 billion in investment. That equals less than 1% of the $2 trillion infrastructure package that the Congress is talking about today. So we're asking that these initiatives be included in the infrastructure package or some package thereafter. These infrastructure initiatives related to recycling were built on prior advocacy plans, paying it forward, U.S. food loss and waste policy, the reduced plastic pollution, plastic actions, and the Compost Act. We've combined the best of these advocacy plans and added another 25 initiatives. The proposed plan includes 16 reduction initiatives valued at $1 billion, 11 reduce initiatives, 16 recycling initiatives, and 8 composting initiatives. And you can see it's across the board, reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. The proposed plan of 50 initiatives also includes 10 grants programs to local governments, 10 grants programs to small businesses, MRF retrofits and upgrades grants program, and federal departments allotments, which includes many, many small business contracts valued at $1.7 billion. How do we pay for this? Of course, we're proposing this through the infrastructure initiatives, and we're proposing 2 funding mechanisms: a national green disposal fee, $20 a ton on landfills and incinerators across the nation. We believe that wasters should pay for this initiative, and that would create $3.6 billion per year and shifts the economic calculations and makes reuse, recycling, and composting more economic in comparison to disposal. And the second fee structure that we propose is a fee on non-recyclables, a national tax on single-use plastic products. And the products that are not designed for reuse, recycling, or composting, one possible route would be to use the plastic pack designated non-recyclable or non-reusable. The revenues created from this stream would be dedicated to this plan's plastics initiatives. So that's another funding mechanism there. The 50 initiatives, Jeremy Drake, with this conference, we give him credit for doing the numbers, and the numbers show that job creation potential is 250,000 jobs approximately, and the GHG reduction potential is a minus 155 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And that's based on a conservative 50% capture rate for 180 million tons currently discarded in landfills and incinerators. That's based on some EPA numbers, as you can see there. So finally, what can you do? And we do have an action call there. Write, email, or call your local U.S. Senator and U.S. Representative. We are asking that this American Recycling Infrastructure Plan be included in the infrastructure conversation in Congress. It could be all 50 components, it could be 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 components of this plan. Remind them as you talk to your congressperson that recycling brings jobs to the local economy. You heard from Paul Connett just recently about jobs for zero waste. All these initiatives, reuse, reduction, composting, and recycling brings jobs to the local economy. And we really feel that these initiatives, these infrastructure activities will bring jobs to each and every locality. And so we ask for an action of you. And so I bring this back to Jill for questions of the audience.
Jill, while you're coming on, I just want to interject that the session before this on federal legislation did highlight that in the approved bipartisan infrastructure bill, there is significant funding, 275 million for one thing, other millions for other things, billions for battery recycling and R&D already in the bill that was signed into law. So the call for action that Bob is making is for the Build Back Better bill to include significant funding for other initiatives.
Great. And Lynn, if you want to go ahead and share your screen while we take a couple questions. Bob, will the water board be asked to rush permitting for compost recycling? Some facilities have been held up for over 3 years.
I'm sorry, what board? Say that again.
The water board.
The water board?
That's a reference to California, perhaps. The California Water Board has a role in permitting of facilities. All over the country, the permitting of facilities is one of the challenges, and that is something that will need to continue to have more advocacy at the local and state level to address. There's nothing in the bills that address that issue.
I thank you, Gary, because I'm unfamiliar with California boards.
Great, thank you. We've got a bunch more questions for you in the chat that we'll try to get to after the other presentations today. And then we'll also post, I know that there is a recording that goes into quite a bit of depth on the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan that we can also share for people that want to get more detailed information. But Lynn, let's turn it over for you.
Great. Can you see my horrifying desktop or my slides?
No, your slide.
Fabulous. Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. Again, my name is Lynn Hoffman, and I'm zooming in from Minneapolis. I'm on the traditional lands of Dakota and Anishinaabe Ojibwe peoples, among others. I'm very happy to be here with you all. Let's see, and I will just start by introducing Eureka Recycling. I've worked here for 18 years. I've been in this role of co-president for 5. As Jill mentioned earlier, we're a nonprofit social enterprise. We're running recycling operations, both collections and processing. And we're doing that in order to inform our advocacy and advance our zero waste mission. We employ over 120 people, process about 110,000 tons of recycling every year. It's like 400 tons a day, which I think about like 500,000 water bottles a day, we think. We hold a variety of contracts for collection and processing across the metro area. We've got the 2 largest contracts in the state, processing for the residential recycling in Minneapolis, and then collection and processing in St. Paul. So our model is really to collect that data and learning that we gain through our operations, and then leverage that towards systems change at the local, state, and national level through our policy work, advocacy, community education, those kind of activities. And Eureka is also one of the founding members of AMBER, the Alliance of Mission-Based Recyclers, and that's who I'm here representing today. AMBER is made up of mission-based recyclers with long histories and deep roots in community-driven recycling and zero waste initiatives. And we all continue to operate model recycling programs today. We've evolved in many ways from the days of collecting in old school buses with volunteers, but over those many decades, the why we're doing this work has really stayed the same. And that mission-driven approach has a big influence over every facet of our operations and the systems change that we're collectively advocating for. So our members are all operating in distinctly different geographies and economies and political conditions, but we have these things in common. We're all zero waste advocates and recyclers, meaning we manage recycling operations. And this gives us a very unique view from the pile as we talk about it. We're experts in mechanical recycling. We know the markets, we understand demand, we can see firsthand how policy changes affect daily operations and existing infrastructure, including material streams and composition. And we're all mission-based. Our goal is zero waste. So not just an empty trash can, of course, but the social, environmental, economic benefits that can come from moving towards a just circular society and keeping fossil fuels in the ground and trees in the forest. So the nuance that we hold as AMBER is to say, yes, there are big problems with the existing recycling systems, for sure, and they need to be solved for. And recycling has a very important role to play in the future that we need, if it's designed and measured with the right metrics. The analog we often use is growing food, right? It's like mega scale, chemical heavy monoculture. Ag kills bees and wastes water and poisons people, but that doesn't mean that growing food is bad. It's in fact essential, but there are much better ways to do it, and recycling is the same. So where we focus our investments for recycling improvements and expansion need to be guided not by waste diversion goals, not by profits, not by corporations trying to improve their image. We really have to center human and ecological health, justice, and regeneration moving forward. So our goal as an alliance is to advance those principles. We're not necessarily trying to create hundreds of additional small zero waste nonprofit recyclers, as dreamy as that would be, but rather really we want to articulate and advance the principles of mission-driven recycling in all the ways that they can be incorporated across the supply chain and across infrastructure. So from policies to bale specs to contracts and RFP design. One important way that we're trying to really kind of change the frame that all of those conversations are being had through is to be clear that MRFs don't manage waste. We often get kind of lumped into that bucket because I think people experience the recycling service sometimes in the same way. You put it in this can and it goes away, or you put it in that can and it goes away. But really the role of MRFs is not to take whatever we get on the tip floor and sort it out and do the best we can with it. we're manufacturing over a dozen different high quality, consistent, cost-effective commodities that are used in the supply chain and that we need more of. And I think, too often the conversation is about how to get MRFs to do their job and take more stuff, and how do we shoehorn in more kinds of packaging and formats of plastic. But that's really squeezing at the wrong end of the tube. Right now, as we're experiencing really incredible and growing momentum to address consumption, plastics, and climate crisis, defending the definition of recycling is becoming more and more critical. And as we see new EPR legislation coming online, rulemaking and regulation and investments begin, that the devil is really going to be in the details. I saw a question in the chat earlier about who's defining what's recyclable, and that's really going to be where the most important battles are fought. It's a critical time to define and defend where recycling is the appropriate, maybe not the appropriate solution, but an appropriate solution for some material. And more importantly, where reduction and reuse should really be the strategy instead. As you all know, there are many complex questions to ask before deciding that recycling is the right fit, or that something can be called recyclable. And I think we see our role as Amber with a lot of our allies to say that just because the answer to any of these questions is, sure, we can, doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do. So let's see, I want to cruise through this so we can hear from Brian. Maybe just to say that in collaboration with lots of allies in the industry space, the policy space, advocacy world, Amber is looking at many different points of intervention for building a zero waste recycling system. So we're focusing our attention on tactics within these 5 strategies. We're looking at increasing collection, funding infrastructure, removing problematic materials, increasing recycled content, and defending the definition of recycling on many fronts within those areas. And we are really, would look forward to talk, I should have put Amber's website on there. We've got one, I'll put it in the chat. But we would look forward to any connections and collaboration in that space, and look forward to hearing from Brian, who's also an Amber member. I can kind of tell you what that looks like on the ground.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, Brian, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen. While Brian's doing that, Lynn, how many organizations currently are a member of the Alliance?
Right now, there's just the 4 founding members. We're small but mighty, but we really, we have decades of experience working together as comrades and like trusted allies. And so as we're kind of getting our feet under us, we wanted to make sure that we were aligned in our principles and our platform. And we're doing all kinds of collaborating and partnerships with other groups and other organizations.
Great, fantastic.
Our membership is small.
Great, Brian, it looks like your slides are about ready.
Everyone just see the slides. Great. Thanks for letting me
Brian,
be here.
we actually see your speaker view, so maybe you can change your view.
While Brian works on that, I know there is several questions coming in regarding plastics. Bob, did you want to address the NRC's role and discussing the hard to recycle plastics? All right. Well, sorry, Brian. It looked like you did have your slides ready, so we could go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm here to talk with you a little bit about who Recycle Ann Arbor is, what the advantages to a mission-based approach to recycling, and how a mission-based approach can foster a better community. So those are basically the ideas that I wanted to talk about today. First, who is Recycle Ann Arbor? Similar to Eureka Recycling, a nonprofit recycler started in 1977. We're a mission-based zero waste recycler. We call our different business units demonstrations, and we have a curbside collection program, the fourth in the nation, back in the late 70s. We've held the contract for recycling for collections in Ann Arbor since its inception. We also have a drop-off station that's about the same age, recycling about 19 different harder to recycle items, free on appliances, electronics, light bulbs, yard waste, those kind of tires, things like that. We have a recovery yard where we do construction demolition recovery. So we have a transfer station and a recovery yard for construction demolition and the accompanying roll-off services for collection of that material. We have a brand new zero waste MRF that we just opened this month in December, about a $7 million investment for Recycle Ann Arbor. We're very proud of, and it's underway and operating locally here in Ann Arbor. We also have an eco park. We call it an eco park. It's 17 acres that we purchased this year. And it's basically to house key zero waste infrastructure for refillables, reusables, recycling businesses. But the idea is to really come at the problem of waste from its source, not from the tailpipe. So it wouldn't be another MRF or something like that. It actually attacked the problem from the source. So we're also, as Lynn mentioned, we're one of the founders, co-founders of Alliance of Mission-Based Recyclers. So what we were asked to talk a little bit about is mission-based recycling and how it's a little bit different than other approaches. As a mission-based recycler, it's clear to us that, and I think everyone knows this, but we sometimes forget recycling isn't the solution to the waste problem. It's part, but it has to be paired with policy, with redesign, and with reuse, and with policy that encourages refillables and things, reusables, and reduction of that material. So it's part of the solution, but without the other components, not an effective tool to get to zero waste. So, and the mission-based approach is it equally sort of prioritizes these three areas of community benefit, environmental impact, and financial sustainability. We have to remain as a financially viable organization so we can continue to do the zero waste work. As I mentioned, we're over 40 years old and have demonstrated that, while creating community benefit and environmental impact. Finding that balance and balancing each of those components is the challenge of a zero waste recycler. First, on just some specific examples of Recycle Ann Arbor and how every community is going to show a little bit of a different benefit from a different perspective, but there are some guiding principles related to mission-based recycling. That doesn't mean necessarily that you're a zero waste, that you're a mission-based nonprofit organization, but you have the values that actually encourage that sort of mission-based approach. And the way that shows up best in Ann Arbor, and again, each community is going to be a little bit different and highlight different areas, but for us, 50 union jobs, better than living, thrivable wages, great benefits, really supporting our people that do our work in a safe way. And then that benefits the community by having that supported good workforce, helps the community thrive as well. So that's a key component. Also, we're not beholden to shareholders, as Lynn mentioned. We're beholden to our community. We are a community-based organization. We've always been a community-based organization. Our shareholders and our quarterly profits are for the community and the people that work for our organization. So that's a very different approach, and that approach we've had from, as Lynn mentioned, for the life of the organization, and that does guide. Those guiding principles guide us in how we go about our business. So, and again, we've been doing this for 40 years. It can work. You can give people thrivable wages. You can give them great benefits. You can make a good, safe workplace. You can keep all of those benefits locally and benefit your community. It can be done. from a outreach and advocacy perspective, you know, the benefit is more long range than rather than looking at the short-term profit, looking at the long range benefits and looking at this sort of triple bottom line or whatever you want to call it of looking at the more comprehensive approach. It has benefit. It's a slower return on investment. And so it's harder to convince investors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here, but also, you know, how we show up in the community is through our K through 12 education that we do, through our policy and advocacy work that we do, and through our adult education that we do. Looking at the principles of the environmental impact, we look at the principle of highest value and best use for the material that we recycle. We don't just sort of push it out the door. We want to know where it's going, what it's getting made into. Prime example of that is our PET. We have a 10-year agreement with PET Market. They guarantee bottle-to-bottle recycling of that material, so it ensures the recyclability of that product again and again. Also, the practices that they use with their staff and with their community are all considered in part of our due diligence. So looking sort of downstream to highest value, best use of the material that we accept and process. Also transparent, credible recycling. I think everyone can agree that, you know, recycling is taking a bit of a hit from both sides in a lot of different areas. So maintaining a level of transparency of where that material goes, what it gets made into, how we practice. We're not perfect, but showing people that these are the realities of recycling. These are the realities of zero waste recycling, and making sure that we conduct our due diligence so that we're a credible entity. And then also, I think Lynn said the view from the pile. But for the view from the pile where we sit, we can look upstream, we can look downstream. So we can look upstream, we can talk to the manufacturers about a product that isn't running through our MRF, that isn't recyclable. You know, those K-cups are gonna fall through the screen and they aren't gonna get recycled, they're gonna go with the glass. Having those discussions with manufacturers and brands, and then looking downstream, again, to where that material goes, what it gets made into, and who's handling our material downstream. So a lot of examples there for sort of the environmental perspective. And then from financial viability, you know, it's always people over profit for us, but we have to maintain a financially sustainable, great place to work. But that approach works, and we can maximize that environmental benefit and that social benefit if we stay focused on that and still show a healthy profit. The way that we do this financially, that way we built the $7 million facility and purchased the 17 acres and do all the things that we do, is strong partnerships. We've been in the community for over 40 years. We're a trusted, credible source. And the partnerships that we've created, local banks, businesses, local environmental groups, all of the different partnerships were needed to be leveraged in order to build this community-based MRF, but also to maintain this sort of zero waste approach to how we get things done. Now, just quickly, how do you foster a mission-based approach in your community? Again, doesn't have to be through a mission-based nonprofit recycler, just encompassing the sort of principles. The first thing to do is to look at does your program, your community's program, embody your community's values? Or is there sort of this race to the bottom of, you know, what's the cheapest way to do it and how do you get rid of it? And that sort of taking that approach and taking that high level view allows you to start looking at the various components, like what is the power structure for how the money is distributed for your various zero waste programs. That money follows power, and that's just a sort of a reality. So looking at your community and how that money flows through the system, how it's allocated. Really amazing communities that want to do amazing work still are sometimes hamstringed by this lowest common denominator approach. And really bringing in that community and embracing and including a collaboration with all those community partners is the only way we could have done it in Ann Arbor. And I think for the most part, if we didn't have those partners and those collaborators, we couldn't have done what we did. So keeping a close eye on how your community's program is financed and who's at the table making those decisions. Is it the municipality? And as the municipality representing that community? In our community, just as a quick example, you know, the city put out a bid for a materials recovery facility, processing their recyclables, and city staff actually chose an out-of-state, out-of-country recycler because it was the apparent low bid. But if you took a closer look, it wasn't actually the lowest bid. And it also didn't represent the community's values. And the community spoke up. Our partnerships allowed us to talk to City Council, to Environmental Commission, to the general public about to ask the question of what they wanted in their recycling program. And they overwhelmingly said, we want a community-based program. We want a community-based recycler that's going to bring highest and best value in our community. And city staff overturned their own decision and signed a 10-year agreement with a nonprofit community-based recycler. That's the power of having those collaborations and having those partnerships. There are many, many dozens of examples of just how that can work, but having those partnerships is key to making that work. And I think in the future for us, and I think a lot of recycling programs around the country, is transitioning our programs from recycling programs to zero waste programs that are community powered, that are mission based, and they're zero waste. And you can have each one of those things, but having all three of those things together is what makes a zero waste program. You can have a community powered program, but it's still pick up whatever's recyclable and haul it versus taking a broader approach. So really having all three of these components in place is what really makes for a successful program. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brian. We've had a lot of questions coming up in the chat. If we could get all of our speakers to come back on board here, and you can go ahead and stop sharing your screens right now, Brian. One of the questions that's come across a couple of different ways has to do with hard to recycle plastic items and who certifies that something actually is recyclable. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists to kind of address from each of your different angles, from what's in the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan, what should we be asking, you know, specifically our senators and Congress people, and then from our recyclers here, you know, what is it that you really need on those items in order to make your programs a success?
Bob?
Yeah, I'll start out. The American Recycling Infrastructure Plan really looks at hard to recycle plastics as a non-recyclable, and so it comes into our taxing structure for revenues. We're looking at a structure where we're trying to recycle and reuse and waste reduce as much as possible, and we see hard to recycle plastics as a waste reduction activity, and perhaps phase it out or redesign it.
Simply tax it or ban it is the answer.
That's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's our view echoes that. You know, I mean, if you look at the poster child of, I hate that plastics drives the conversation, but you know, honestly, in the hard to recycle items, that's typically what we see in the residual. And so, you know, even if you look at PET, the most recyclable, potentially, we're still capturing less than 20% of what's in the stream. And so our view is that we really need to focus our investments on improving the very few types of plastic packaging that might be candidates for circularity or recycling, and not waste our money trying to come up with the next new technology technology to make styrofoam recyclable, we just got to stop. We can redesign it, find an alternative. So I think that the majority of plastic packaging recycling is not a good candidate for.
Yeah, I would just add to that, the burden of financing new equipment for new materials, whether they get recycled back again or not, that burden is somewhat shifting slowly over time, but the burden is still on the recycler to finance that equipment, and it just digs us into a deeper and deeper hole. So as we go through this process of determining what's recyclable and what's not, that's a key consideration for a typical recycler. But I would definitely agree with what's Lynn's point.
And I would just highlight an answer to Kelly Jaramilo's question about who would certify. I think the California Truth in Labeling bill is probably the model, AB 343, that was adopted into law this past year, and is out there as a great model for other states to adopt, and for the national government to do so as well. The National Recycling Coalition is working with the National Stewardship Action Council to develop a webinar just on truth in labeling coming early in 2022, and that bill will be highlighted in that webinar.
Brian, while you were speaking about the PET, a question came in. If you could talk a little, you talked about the the guarantee that it would be bottle to bottle. Can you talk a little bit more about that program?
Yeah, that's an agreement we have with our end user that is able to, they figured out a way to use a percentage of thermoform and make that bottle, that PET bottle, back into a bottle again. And we feel like under current conditions, it's not perfect, but under current conditions, recycling from bottle back to bottle again assures the highest opportunity to get that material recycled again and again, because everyone knows recycling it once into a park bench is great, but looking at the circularity of recycling that material bottle to bottle certainly has merit, and that's why we've partnered with them.
Great. Bob.
Yeah, I think that's great news that it's not downcycling, but I do have a problem with bottled water being bottled in the Everglades of Florida and being shipped to California for drinking. We're talking a carbon footprint transportation of the bottles, and we're talking infiltration of salt water into the Everglades and the drinking water supply of Florida. And we're really looking at that situation in Michigan and the bottling of water in Michigan and shipping across the country as well as other areas. Bottled water for single-use containment is a significant problem, and we need to question that practice.
I think we would agree and say that, we need to, I think the role of recycling in a big way is to mitigate harm right now. I mean, we're burning or burying 80% of the PET bottles right now. So while we're working on infrastructure for reuse and refill and reduction of single use, in the interim, I think recycling can play an important role in reducing the harm. But certainly we do have to thread that needle and make sure that recycling doesn't become the off-ramp or the greenwashing for single use long-term. And that's the needle to thread for sure.
Along those lines, I'd like to highlight the Sierra Club adopted a national zero waste policy, or an updated one, in December of 2019. And what they called for is recognizing that bioproducts, compostable products, are still single-use products, and that the goal is transitioning to reusables, like we heard so much about earlier in the conference today. So that's official national zero waste policy of this National Sierra Club, which now has 3 million members, and 50 of them have joined us at this conference. So appreciate the Sierra Club Grassroots Network sponsoring those 50 people to be here.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're just about out of time for today's session, but I know we'll keep taking questions in the chat and be able to respond to those, and that all of you are available for questions and conversation after. Just want to reiterate that I know, although it's the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan, I think the definition of recycling, the importance of recycling is not to be understated, but that the plan really address all of the R's and looking at a full systemic approach to resource management. Thanks, everyone.